everybody. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am Carmina Cirioli. I am the co-executive director for PATH Connecticut. We are joined here tonight by Marnie McNiff, who is our Facebook Live specialist, and she does everything. She's our health information specialist, our education specialist, and also our communications expert. So she wears many hats. But tonight we have special guests, which hopefully some of you guys remember from our last Facebook Live we did about a year ago. We have Debbie Ellis and Ginger Nichols from the Connecticut Newborn Screening Unit, or Network, sorry. Just to give you a quick little background, Debbie is a RN with over 21 years of experience in the NICU and early childhood. In her current role as the program coordinator for the Connecticut Newborn Screening Network, she oversees referrals to the network for out-of-range newborn screening. Ginger is a genetic counselor who has been working in the field of genetics for 24 years. She is currently working with the Connecticut Newborn Screening Network and is available to talk to any family that comes through. So welcome, guys. I guess we have another guest, and it's Carmina Cirioli. Oh my goodness. So thank you so much again for joining us. We're really looking forward to this because, again, newborn screening is extremely important. As we were just discussing prior to coming on, there's a lot of things that, a lot of diagnoses that can be treated if caught early on. So we have some questions and answers, or questions that we'll, ask you guys, and if you guys can answer, that would be great. And feel free to jump in with any other questions that you may have. So do you guys want to say anything before we start?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. It's a pleasure to be here. I know we were here a few months for Newborn Screening Awareness Month, so we're happy to join you in the new year as well.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, my dog is barking if you hear it.
That's okay. We're all family friendly and pet friendly here, so that's okay. So why don't we start with just asking the typical question, what is newborn screening?
Sure. Newborn screening is the practice of screening every baby, usually before they go home from the hospital, between 24 and 48 hours of life, for rare conditions that are not obvious or apparent at birth. Sometimes you can't tell just by looking at a newborn if they might have a health condition. Newborn screening allows these babies to be screened and treated before they get sick. It prevents very serious health problems. It's the largest and most successful disease prevention system in the country, and it is the fastest, safest way to protect your baby against certain diseases and medical conditions. Every baby in the country has newborn screening. We all had newborn screening when we were infants. Most of our children, all of our children have had newborn screening. Yeah, it's something that very few people can define and very few people talk about, and most people don't even know the results of their own child's newborn screen.
Yeah, it's
So how far back?
Sorry,
I'm sorry,
I just talked to someone last weekend and they asked what I did, and I said I work in newborn screening, and he said, I don't think my children had that. And I'm like, they did. Never got to hear the results, but yeah, sorry. So yeah, it started in the 60s, 1969, 64, Debbie will know.
Wow, okay, so it does really go far back then. Okay, I didn't realize it was that far back. But it was like more of a 1970, 80 kind of thing. So, oh, it's interesting.
So when it started, it was just one test, and then gradually over the years, they add in other disorders, because to be considered to be on what we screen for, you need to be able to it needs to meet the criteria. If you're going to catch it early and treatment's available, and starting treatment early is going to make a difference. So that plays into what disorders get added to the newborn screening.
Okay, that I didn't know either. Oh, that's pretty, okay, that's interesting. And every year new ones get added on, as not every year. It depends.
Yeah, they go, there is a national group or a federal kind of group that is in charge of really researching the disorders that are out there. And there's a lot of thought process that goes into them before they're added to the what they call the uniform recommended screening test for all states. It's called RUSP for short, RUSP. If anyone
Hmm.
wants to go look them up, you'll find, if you Google RUSP newborn screening, you'll see the list of disorders that are listed as recommended for states.
Mhm.
So being that we're going to kind of share this with many people throughout social media, is every state testing for the same diagnosis? Is that how it's?
Not necessarily. Most states test for the same 20 or 30 basic conditions, and some states test for a few more. In Connecticut, we screen for a lot. We screen for about 70 different conditions. Not every state does, and you can go to the website babiesfirsttest.org and click on your state, and it will tell you exactly which conditions your state screens for.
Oh,
Most newborn screening conditions are metabolic and genetic disorders that are passed down or may show up in a family for the first time. You don't necessarily know that the parents are carriers for that condition. An example of a newborn screening condition would be MCAD, which is a disease that results in the buildup of fatty acids in the body. And without treatment, it could lead to brain damage and breathing problems. Um, we also test for some endocrine disorders like congenital hypothyroidism, which is a disease where infants are missing their thyroid gland or their thyroid gland is not working well, and they don't produce enough of their thyroid hormone to stimulate growth and brain development. And if we catch that condition, then we can start them on medication right away, and they have very typical growth and development. But if it goes undetected, then they can have significant developmental delays and health problems. Something else that we test for are hematologic disorders, such as sickle cell anemia, which is a disease where the red blood cells have an abnormal shape. They're shaped like a C or like a sickle, which reduces their ability to carry oxygen throughout the body. So although most of the conditions that we screen for are genetic, we do see them in lots of different specialties.
And I guess I'll just add it. So newborn screening has kind of 3 different components. So one that Debbie and I work in is called like the heel stick or the blood spot. So after birth, the baby gets a little prick on the heel, and the blood goes on a piece of paper called a filter paper, goes to the lab, and they use those little blood spots to do the testing for these metabolic genetic disorders, the thyroid, the sickling disorders. But there is also, you might also, while the baby's in the hospital, hear them we're doing the newborn hearing screen where they hook up little things on the baby's head, and they'll also do a little pulse ox to check for major heart defects. So it's just measuring the oxygen level in the blood. And those, I think most families hear while they're in the hospital before the baby goes home, how those 2 pieces of the newborn screen went. And then the part that Debbie and I work with the state newborn screen lab, those results are usually within a week, right, Debbie? Sometimes faster, 3-4 days.
Mhm. Yeah, typically once the testing is complete, the Department of Public Health, where the blood spot cards are tested, will send a fax to the baby's primary care provider that says the results are within normal limits. Or if the results are not within normal limits, as soon as that's identified, they would reach out to the primary care provider and they would reach out to us at the network. We would help to coordinate some follow-up for that baby, because if the results are not within normal range, something needs to be done. And that might be an appointment with a specialist. It might be some follow-up blood work. It might be repeating the newborn screen, or visiting the hospital that very day, depending on what the condition is that's identified and how significant the results are.
Yeah, because
So
I imagine what the screening that's done at the newborn lab on the piece of paper, the filter paper, that's not as good as a test as if we draw blood and actually test on the blood sample. So that's why sometimes it'll say, let's follow up with a blood test or a urine test. And it's important to go. I know no one wants to do that to their baby, right? But it's better to be safe than sorry. And the faster you go, the faster we'll know if there's something that we need to treat, or if you can kind of put that whole scary moment behind you now and focus on just being happy with the new baby.
so how quickly right after, like, so let's say you do get a call back from the doctor or the nurse, and they're saying, okay, you need to go get tested because the baby's newborn screening was flagged. Is there a time period? I mean, I'm sure a lot of parents would rush to go get it done quickly. But is there a time frame? I know sooner the better, I'm guessing, but.
Yeah, we would love it if everybody went same day or next day to have the
Okay.
labs done. But generally we'll say within the same week is ideal. I know that not everybody can drop everything and go immediately, but yes, definitely the sooner the better. And something that we like to stress too is that in many cases we're ordering not just blood tests, but also urine tests. So a baby doesn't have to be catheterized for this. It's just a clean urine where you can use a bag, like a urine collection bag on the baby to collect that urine and bring a sample to the lab. And it's important to bring that urine back in a timely manner too. So often what happens is the baby will have their blood work drawn the same day or the next day, but then it's several weeks later before the parents are able to collect that urine sample and find time to get it back to the lab. And it's not as useful to the doctors to have labs that were collected several weeks or a month apart. It's really important for them to be collected within a day of each other.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, but I don't know if we want to introduce our new friend.
I was just going to do that.
Urine testing, but sorry.
I was just texting her. So let me introduce her because I think she has a question to ask. So Andrea Richardson, I know she's under my name and I'll change that for her in a few seconds, but Andrea Richardson is our health information specialist in the Hartford area. She's one of us. She's amazing, and she was really interested in joining tonight about newborn screening. So do you have a question you wanted to ask them?
Thank you so much, guys, for having me tonight. I think the work that you guys do is amazing. I advocate for it, and I definitely recommend, families that have new babies to make sure that, at times, even if that information isn't shared, which I know it pretty much is, but of fetal death that occurs with women of color, and just like concerns that they might not know what are some red flags or concerns to reach out for support and help. And I was just wondering, along with the screening, if families themselves find that they themselves notice some things that are off and maybe it wasn't flagged by a pediatrician, what can families do to offset these type of mortalities that occur just because of lack of not, having those red flag things to look for? There's certain things that are given to families that, outside of being out of the hospital with their baby, that they might be able to go through a checklist that says, okay, this looks good on their own, outside of what a provider is doing.
That's kind of a hard question for me because I'm not really in the pediatric field. So, I mean, but if they notice who knows their baby best, right? The parents know their babies best. And maybe if you're a brand new parent, you haven't been around other babies, you might not pick up on things, but I've learned you really have to listen to the moms, right? Or dads, because they know their child better than anyone else. So I think my number one tip would be, if you notice anything's off, I would call the pediatrician, the baby's doctor. And there's a lot of places so in Connecticut, and I'm sure other states as well, we said this might not just air in Connecticut, but we have support services. So, where we work at Connecticut Children's, and they're linked with all through the state of Connecticut, a care coordination center that can help with things with insurance, diapers, food insecurity, getting transportation to the doctor if people need help. I don't know if Debbie wants to add anything, or
For most of the metabolic and genetic conditions, some of the first things that we look for are that the baby is very lethargic or very difficult to rouse and wake for a feeding. Maybe the baby is not eating well, not able to latch and suck from a bottle. The baby might be spitting up an excessive amount, not a little bit after feed. Baby might be losing weight or extremely irritable. I know a lot of these are very subjective things, and for a new mom, even any mom, it's easy to read into any of these signs and symptoms, right? But I think it's important to note too that these are, if a baby had a condition that was on the newborn screening panel, it would be identified through newborn screening. It's very, very rare for one of those conditions to be missed. But just in general, I think if your baby was lethargic and not eating and spitting, that's important to tell the doctor, because those are going to be your first signs in a newborn that something is wrong. And any fever in a newborn under 6 months, they should be seen by a doctor immediately, because it could be a sign of something serious.
No, totally agree. I was actually more so focused on the fact that I work with families that there's a cultural disconnect. And you might have a second and third generation that live with them as a newborn mom, a new mom. And what I've noticed is they're listening a lot more to the family and those who've, had babies in the family than they are to the providers and those in the medical field. And so this is why I was concerned about not being a new mom, feeling like you're like always worried or hypochondriac, or and being labeled like, oh, you're always worried, as opposed to, I don't know what I should be looking for. I don't know what, outside of maybe nothing is picked up, but I have had cases where families or new moms have had issues with their children, and they thought it was something wrong, but family members were saying, oh, you're making a big deal out of it. It's nothing. And so they overlooked what potentially was something more harmful. And then just this taking that very strong position as a mom, like a mother bear, and saying, I'm not going to listen to you guys, I'm taking my kids to the doctors. But there's a lot of cultural disconnect that fosters more harm than good. And the intention is good, but they don't realize that there are things that are, beyond their experience, and they're advising these young moms in error, and making them feel like they're just being, and like, what do you call that? Like a mom that's just overly concerned, and it might be really legitimate. So what I was wondering is, for new young moms who may not have that support system outside of the hospital and want to have, like, are there leaflets or something that is provided, upon discharge? If I know I'm a provider, I know this is a new mom, here are some things I'm going to give. Like, I know for a fact they give you breastfeeding information, but for newborn screening and stuff, I think that, yes, what's caught in the hospital gets caught in the hospital, but what about those things that aren't caught in the hospital? So that's some of my concern. That's where I'm looking, how can we be proactive in that arena? Am I making sense?
Yeah, that is a concern. I think that we see that in a variety of areas. I know even working in the NICU and as a maternity nurse, you would so often see grandparents say, if a baby was fussy, just put the baby on their belly and they'll settle right down. But now we know that we can't put babies on their belly to sleep, that it's safest for them to always be on their back to sleep. And that's another example of, kind of a generational disconnect there. So I think that's something that is important. We do give newborn screening information. Every family should receive newborn screening pamphlets in their educational folder when they have a baby. They should also be receiving one prenatally when they go to the OB provider. And I think that highlights an important area where education is needed, both prenatally and in the hospital, that we need to empower women to be able to say when they believe something is wrong with their child.
And that's information that we can actually, those, I know we, with the family advisory group, worked on these pamphlets. And those are something that would be, great that we can share with our families that do have newborn. And you're right, Andrea, there are a lot that, my son was older and he wasn't diagnosed, he's on the spectrum. But I had that. My family was like, oh, he's just lazy. Oh, he's just slow, or he'll get there. He's just not, he's not ready. Well, some parents would take that and say, oh, thank God, nothing's wrong with them. But then you got other parents that are like, no, this is just not right. We need to do something about it. So yeah, I could see that gap.
I think it goes back to try to trust your gut. And, as a mom, I know it's not easy to stand up to family. Like, I get it. Right. And like you said, Carmine, like, oh, actually you're saying, don't worry about it. That makes me feel better. I get it. There's both sides to it. Right. So,
right.
But sometimes, with the baby, it's better to be safe than sorry. Just and the pediatrician won't care if you're calling to ask a question, which your family is like, oh, the pediatrician doesn't want to be bothered. That's what they're there for. Yeah. And I feel like sometimes there's like mistrust too that comes up between families and healthcare providers, but really, I know sometimes they're not perfect and we say stupid things, or, you know, like that can be insulting or rude, but they're there to help, and they in their core, they really want to help. So there's no question that's not out of the realm of asking.
And the things too, that's why we're doing these videos too, is to really get the information out. What is newborn screening? You know, why is it so important? Why is follow-up important? So we're really trying to, you know, this is our second one doing it, and we really want to, and we did a little video also during September, during the newborn screening month, just to get the awareness out, why it's so important. And it's like you said, it's better to be safe than, you know, finding out later that there is something wrong. But so like, how long after the test is done, and let's say you do go for your first visit and the results aren't in, hopefully they are in, but I'm just, you know, in case for some reason, you know, they haven't come in. I mean, do you reach out to the pediatrician and say, hey, I haven't heard anything? I mean, I personally would have liked to have heard either way, good or bad. But
yeah, we are encouraging all primary care providers to have that discussion with families, whether the results can't come back within normal range or out of range, because we want it to be a routine, standard topic of conversation and of care. And maybe your first child didn't flag for anything, but maybe the next one will. And just having an awareness that this is happening and that children are being screened will prepare you to receive those results. It's easier to know that it happened and then to know that something was out of range than to not have any idea that blood work was done or drawn and have someone call you and say, the newborn screen was out of range, and you're just blindsided and you say, what is this test? When was it done? And that happens frequently. The pediatrician or primary care provider should have those results at the 2-week checkup. If not, then I think at that point, the baby is seen weekly until a month. They should have them the following week that you're there. And I would just stress that you should ask every week that you go, because if they don't have them, the pediatrician should be following up on it.
yeah, thank you for that one.
And they might be in the habit of just when they get them, they file it away and forget to talk about it at the visit. So again, no questions unacceptable. Oh, you can ask them anything when you're at the visit.
Yeah, I wish I knew that, like I said, 26 years ago.
Yeah, agreed.
This is definitely something that, yeah.
And
I mean, back then it was called
there's a new, so they will also report out when we talked about we're screening for sickle cell disorder and other hemoglobinopathies like that are sickling. They do actually report out when they determine if someone has sickle cell trait, so that you're a carrier but don't actually have sickle cell disease. And I used to work in prenatal genetics, and I remember thinking families would come and they'd talk about their family history, and I'd say, well, do you know what your newborn screen results were because you were screened for it already? And they're like, no. And it's lost, right? It's, you know, they can't get a hold of the pediatric records, or they were never told, or they had no idea. And so then we have to go, if they want to, they go get tested again. Whereas like, oh, you were already tested once. But so learning that information, if they can go along, and then they can have that information just as they get older and are taking over themselves for their own healthcare as adults.
That's good information. So now after the newborn screening has been done, you know, a child is flagged, and what are the next steps? I mean, how long do you wait to get referred to a genetic counselor or a doctor? Is it immediately? How does that, you know, work?
It really depends on the condition. With some conditions that we consider to be high stakes, we take action immediately, and Ginger will talk to those patients the same day or the next day, or we'll bring them into the office and the geneticist or provider will see them the same day or the next day or within a week, because it's important for an in-person evaluation and discussion and genetic testing. In other cases that might not be as serious, or where we don't believe that the risk is quite as high, we will order blood work and labs, urine labs first, and wait for those results to come back, which is generally about 2 to 3 weeks. And if those results remain out of range, then we will refer to a genetic counselor and do the DNA testing. The DNA testing usually takes about a month to come back.
Yeah, that's I think that's hard, right? So each day it feels like forever, right, when you're waiting to hear results, but it usually takes about 3 to 4 weeks for those results to come back. So it adds another layer to the follow-up.
Mm. I'm going to put a plug in for Path here, because while these families are waiting for this time, for those results, or even to get into seeing a genetic doctor or counselor, I'm not really quite sure how. Sometimes it could be months waiting. Path is always here to be able to provide resources and support, and to be able to talk to a family and all of that. I just had to do that plug. I'm sorry.
Yes,
But
that was good. And I definitely talk about Path with my families, and you're a great resource, and I'm thankful for you, for your group.
but I'm sure there's others too. I mean, like we said, you guys had created those infographics, the brochures and stuff that are really good to be sharing with families also during that time frame.
We do have a website. I think we're going to try to post the link to it, where it has tips about how to get ready. I mean, it talks a little bit in general about newborn screening, but it has tips about how can I get ready to take the baby for the blood draw or for the urine test. And I do have to tell you that the families that I work with, getting the urine sample is much more frustrating than getting the blood draw on the baby. So, and Debbie, who worked in the NICU and nurseries with babies, had really great ideas of how to like catch urine, because those little bags leak. And so she put some tips on our website. I don't know if you want to say any of your tips that you have, Debbie.
My urine tips.
How to catch your urine.
Yeah. If you bring the baby to most outpatient labs in Connecticut, we use Quest a lot. Typically, they will draw the baby's blood and give the family some of the urine collection bags, which is like a Ziploc bag, but it has a sticker around the edge. And you're supposed to stick it on the baby. And the thought is that the baby will then pee in the bag, and you will remove the bag and pour it into a specimen cup and return it to the lab. But it seldom works that easily. It's very difficult to stick the bag onto the baby when these chubby little babies have all these folds and wiggle around and move a lot and have diapers that are positioned differently. So it doesn't always stick on that great. And then more often than not, the baby will pee outside of the bag. And then when the parents try to grab the bag and tip it into the specimen cup, the urine will spill everywhere. And it can take multiple attempts to do this. And every attempt, you're sticking onto the baby's skin in a sensitive area, and it can cause diaper rash, and everybody gets very frustrated. So a couple of things that have been helpful. I think the most helpful thing is if you could bring the bag to the pediatrician's office, or have the pediatrician supply the bag and even apply it while you're at the visit. Sometimes the baby will pee during the visit, and the doctor or nurse can help remove the bag, put it in the cup, and give you a cup that you can then carry to the office. And that works really nicely. Even if the baby doesn't pee while you're at the visit, if they can help put the bag on, you can then go to the lab, and hopefully the baby will have had to go between the time that you're at the doctor's office and the time that you're at the lab. Whether you're collecting it at the lab or at the doctor's office or at home, something else that's useful is just taking some cotton balls or some gauze and sticking it in the bag and all around the edges of the bag. So that way, if the baby pees outside of the bag, hopefully that gauze or urine will have soaked up some of that. And as long as the baby doesn't poop on it at the same time, you can just squeeze out those cotton balls or that gauze into the bag. We typically don't need a lot of urine. Most of these tests is about 4 milliliters of urine. So it's a very small amount. So as long as you can get a little bit, like a capful in that bag, then you're good to go.
Yeah, liquid gold, right? Ways to get your liquid gold. I do. The other thing I want to point out, and I didn't know this when I first started working with families, is that the urine samples kind of need to be refrigerated or frozen to do the test. So you want to get it to the Quest or whatever lab you're using to drop it off soon. And Debbie did bring up a little while ago that it's important actually when you're doing if we do blood and urine, we want those samples to be close to each other, because if say the baby had the blood draw on today, but then parents couldn't get the urine sample till a week later, it's not as useful because we're trying to look at how, metabolically, how are they processing foods? And so it's what's building up in the blood and urine. And the closer they are taken together in a time point, the better the results will help us figure out what's going on. But like I said, and like in the real world, getting a urine sample is very hard. But hopefully everyone heard Debbie's tips and can get them now.
That's a good tip. So that's really, I think, all the questions that I have. Andrea, do you have any? Marnie, are there any now?
There's none in the chat. I've been posting, people can definitely keep commenting even after the video is over, and we'll try and get those questions answered for you. I also put a link to our email for PATH, and you can ask us any questions. If we can't answer them, we know exactly who to direct them to, right, Debbie and Ginger?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So that's great. So with that said, thank you again for joining us. Really appreciate it. I think it's definitely, information that we need to spread and share. It's extremely important. And I think it's still, information, a bit of information that families still really need to learn, especially the new ones. And we, PATH staff, wherever we can help to spread the word, we are here to help you guys too.
Thank
So
you
with that
so
said,
much.
thank you. So with that said, good night, everybody. And I'm sure we'll be doing another Facebook Live in the next couple months.
Thank you.